Thomas Reed stood there, beneath the shadow of the colossal airplane, the wind howling across the tarmac as if it wanted to tear apart his tattered reflective uniform. A nameless ground crew worker, his hands trembling not from the cold but from a choice tearing him apart: his daughter's life or an elderly woman he'd never met. The boarding stairs shook violently, the clang of metal drowning out his shout as he lunged forward, defying security, defying suspicion, defying everything to keep her from a fatal fall. He had no power, no fame, only a heart that refused to yield. Would you dare trade your entire world just to keep a promise no one heard? Late afternoon on March 28, 2025, the international airport was bathed in a grayish twilight, heavy clouds drifting slowly across the sky. The roar of engines echoed from the runway, leaving faint trails of smoke like wounds in the air. Inside the waiting area at Gate A7, passengers moved like an endless river, some rushing with heavy suitcases, others clutching small children, their laughter mingling with weary sighs. Flight JL682 to Tokyo will close its gate in 15 minutes. The emotionless voice from the loudspeaker repeated, a cold, relentless reminder. Thomas Reed, an airport janitor, walked through the corridor of Gate A7, his old worn-out shoes clicking against the marble floor. His orange, reflective uniform was stained with sweat, his frayed gloves clinging to hands, roughened by hours of wiping seats and picking up trash. Today had been an endless grind, 12 hours of non-stop work, and all he wanted was to finish his shift and return to the hospital, where his daughter, Lily, lay waiting for a heart surgery. He'd spent a year scraping together every penny to afford. But then he stopped, his tired eyes catching a solitary figure amid the bustling crowd. In a quiet corner near the boarding gate, Eleanor Hayes stood alone, her legs trembling, her hands gripping a wooden cane, polished smooth by time. Her gray, threadbare sweater hugged her frail frame, her silver hair tied neatly back, but it couldn't hide the fragility etched into every wrinkle by the years. Her eyes shimmered with a mix of anxiety and deep sorrow, fixed on the stairs leading to the plane, a steep mountain for her weary legs. Thomas approached, bending slightly, his voice low and warm like a small flame in the cold space. "Are you all right, ma'am? Do you need help?" Eleanor flinched, turning to look at him, her cloudy eyes flickering with surprise. Her voice was faint but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, dear, but I don't want to trouble anyone. I'm just trying to get on the plane to see my son in Tokyo. It's been so many years." Thomas gave a faint smile, memories of his own mother flooding back those final days when she, too, had trembled like this, looking at him with eyes full of trust and helplessness. He couldn't leave Eleanor here alone. "Then lean on me," he said, his tone firm. "I'll get you up there." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly, her bony hand grasping his arm. Thomas gently supported her, guiding her step by slow step toward the stairs, ignoring the glares from the crowd behind him. But inside, a quiet unease began to stir. He knew his shift was nearly over, and any delay could earn him a reprimand from his supervisor. His daughter, Lily, needed him more than ever, but right in front of him was an old woman who needed him now. He told himself, "Just a few minutes, I can do this." The boarding stairs weren't tall, just 15 steps or so, but for Eleanor's aged legs, each one was a small battle. Wind swept in from the tarmac, carrying the chill and the sharp smell of burning fuel, rattling the metal panels of the stairs. Thomas guided her patiently, his hand steady to keep her from slipping, whispering, "Take it slow, you're almost there." Passengers behind them began to murmur, a man in an expensive suit muttering under his breath, "Why is it taking so long?" But Thomas paid no mind. He heard only Eleanor's faint breathing, saw only the spark in her eyes as they neared the plane's door. Suddenly, a sharp female voice cut through from above. "What's going on down there?" Clara Dubois, the flight's chief attendant, stepped out from the plane's entrance, her posture rigid in a crisp navy uniform. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her face sharply made up, but her eyes blazed with unmasked irritation. She crossed her arms, glaring down at Thomas and Eleanor, her brow arching as if she'd caught an unforgivable mistake. "We're on a tight schedule," she snapped, her voice piercing the wind. "If this old lady can't board faster, maybe she should book another flight." Thomas tightened his grip on Eleanor's hand to reassure her, anger rising in his chest. He looked up at Clara, forcing himself to stay calm. She just needs a little time. It won't take long. Clara stepped down one stair, hand on her hip, her tone dripping with skepticism. You're not a passenger assistant. This isn't your job. Stop holding us up. Eleanor bowed her head, her voice choked. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. But Thomas wouldn't let Clara overpower her. He straightened, his gaze steely. She has as much right to board as anyone else. If the airport doesn't have a wheelchair ready, I'll help her. Clara clenched the walkie-talkie in her hand, her lips pressing into a thin line. She glanced around, noticing a few passengers watching, which stopped her from arguing further in public. Fine, do what you want, she said, her voice icy, then turned sharply away, though her eyes still shot daggers. Thomas took a deep breath, guiding Eleanor higher, ignoring the growing whispers behind him. But in his mind, a small voice began to nag. What are you doing, Thomas? If they report you, you'll lose your job. What about Lily? He shook his head, pushing the thought away, but unease crept into every step he took. The international airport at peak hour was like a roaring beast, endless announcements blaring, crowds surging, suitcase wheels rattling across the marble floor. Amid the chaos, Eleanor stood silently in the throng, her trembling hands clutching her cane, her eyes fixed on the departure board with a look of worry. Thomas watched her from a distance, concern etching his face. He'd seen her a few times before a regular passenger, always quiet, always refusing help to avoid being a burden. Today, he noticed the sluggishness in her movements, and when an old man accidentally bumped into her, making her stumble, Thomas couldn't stand by any longer. He hurried toward her, a sinking feeling growing in his gut. But before he could reach her, Clara Dubois appeared, her impatience clear in her neat uniform. She signaled to a tall security guard in a black uniform, his eyes cold, his hands gloved. Do you need help? Clara asked, her tone devoid of patience. We need to keep the airport moving smoothly. Eleanor nodded faintly, forcing a smile. Thank you, dear. I just need a moment. But Clara didn't wait. She gestured to the guard. Elderly passengers need assistance, but we can't let them slow things down. Thomas's heart tightened. He shouted, Wait! But it was too late. The guard, in his haste, gave Eleanor a slight push on her back to hurry her along. For an elderly woman like her, even a small shove was enough to shatter her fragile balance. She staggered, her cane slipping from her grasp, clattering across the floor. It happened in a flash. She crashed hard onto the stone floor, a dull thud echoing as the surrounding area froze in shock. Blood trickled slowly from her forehead, staining the cold marble with a thin red streak. Time seemed to halt. A moment of horrified silence enveloped the scene. Then a woman's scream shattered it, followed by frantic murmurs. Thomas rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her, his shaking hands touching her shoulder. Eleanor, can you hear me? The old woman's eyes fluttered open, wide with panic, her breathing shallow like a fading breeze. Thomas whipped around to Clara and the guard, his voice a roar. What have you done? Clara stepped back, her face paling, stammering. I didn't mean to. The guard tried to stay composed. I was just trying to get her moving faster. By pushing her down? Thomas bellowed, his eyes blazing. A team of medics raced in with a stretcher, quickly checking Eleanor and lifting her onto it. Thomas followed, his fists clenched, his heart breaking. He couldn't believe it, an elderly passenger treated so cruelly in the middle of a bustling airport. As the stretcher rolled away, he turned back to Clara, his voice dropping to a furious growl. Do you see what you've done? Do you realize what you've caused? Clara didn't answer, standing there, her hands trembling, but someone else didn't let it slide. Hiroshi Tanaka, an Asian passenger in a sharp black suit, stepped forward, handing Thomas his phone. I recorded it all. This won't be forgotten. Thomas stared at the screen, each second of the video fueling his rage. He gripped the phone tightly. They had to be held accountable. Thomas stood in the hospital waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a pale glow on his face, the sharp smell of antiseptic filling the air. Eleanor lay on a hospital bed, her wrinkled face ashen, eyes closed, a white bandage wrapped around her forehead. Nurses whispered to a doctor about her condition, minor fractures and a head injury, with risks of complications still looming. Thomas's ears buzzed, anger and helplessness pressing down on his chest. He thought of Lily, waiting for him at another hospital, wondering if he'd make it back to her tonight. Hiroshi Tanaka approached, holding out his phone. "We have to bring this to light. I've uploaded the video to social media. It's going viral." Thomas looked at the screen. Hundreds of furious comments flooded in. "The airport's irresponsible. They treat the elderly like trash." He gritted his teeth. "We can't let them bury this." Just then, the door swung open. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit entered. Richard Grayson, the airport's CEO, flanked by a team of lawyers and PR reps. Grayson fixed Thomas with a stern look. "We deeply regret this incident. We're prepared to cover Eleanor's medical bills and offer a substantial compensation." Thomas crossed his arms, his voice icy. "Money? You think a payout can cover this up? This was an assault, not an accident. Eleanor wouldn't be here if your staff weren't so callous." Grayson frowned, but faced with Thomas's piercing glare and Hiroshi's presence, he knew denial wasn't an option. A lawyer spoke up. "We'd like to settle this quietly. If you stay silent, we can offer a deal enough to support your family." Thomas let out a scornful laugh, turning to Hiroshi. "Hear that? They think they can buy us off." Hiroshi raised his phone, recording the exchange. "No cover-up. We'll take this to justice." Grayson's expression stiffened, but before he could respond, the door flew open again. A swarm of reporters burst in, cameras and microphones aimed at Grayson. "Can you explain this morning's incident? Why did your staff mistreat an elderly passenger?" Sweat beaded on Grayson's forehead, but the tension didn't stop there. Another airport worker, Jack Carter, Thomas's co-worker, stepped in, his voice shaky. "Thomas, I have to tell you, I overheard Clara and the guard talking earlier. They deliberately rushed Eleanor because they feared discipline if the flight was delayed. I've got proof for recording from the internal radio." Thomas spun toward Jack, eyes wide. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Jack bowed his head. "I was scared of losing my job, but after seeing her fall, I couldn't stay quiet." The second climax erupted. Thomas snatched the recording device from Jack and played it for the reporters. Clara's voice rang out clearly. "Push her along quick. Don't let the boss blame us." Shouts of outrage erupted from the press. Grayson's face drained of color, and Thomas stood there, hands trembling with fury and resolve. The truth wasn't just a video anymore. It was a web of wrongdoing laid bare. Days later, Hiroshi's video and Jack's recording continued to storm social media. The press dove in, headlines screaming, "International airport, apathy or crime." Public outrage boiled over, thousands demanding justice for Eleanor, the hashtag Justice for Eleanor spreading worldwide. Clara was summoned to an airport press conference, standing before a wall of cameras, her face pale. Grayson sat beside her, struggling to maintain control. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Clara stammered, her voice quivering. "I was just following airport rules." A reporter cut in. "Rules that allow pushing an elderly woman down?" Clara froze. Grayson cleared his throat. "We deeply regret this. The involved staff have been suspended. We're committed to retraining employees and improving service." But the apology couldn't quell the fury. An official investigation launched. The guard faced charges for causing injury, Clara was held accountable for negligence, and Grayson resigned under shareholder pressure. The airport announced a new policy, a dedicated elderly passenger support team at every gate, with staff specially trained in empathy and safety. Back at the hospital, Eleanor awoke, still weak. She smiled when she saw Thomas by her side, her frail hand grasping his. "You did wonderfully, Thomas. You stood up for what's right." Thomas squeezed her hand gently, relief washing over him. The past days had been a torrent of pressure, anger over Eleanor, worry for Lily, sleepless nights facing the airport's threats. But now, peace spread through him. "You trusted me, Thomas," Eleanor whispered. "Always did." His eyes stung, but he smiled. Hiroshi entered, handing Thomas an envelope. "This is from the online community. They raised funds for your daughter's surgery." Thomas opened it, his hands shaking as he saw enough to save Lily. He looked at Hiroshi, voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." Hiroshi patted his shoulder. "You did the right thing. That's enough." Finally, a week later, Thomas returned to Gate A7. He stood there, watching the new support team guide an old man onto a plane, his eyes alight with faith. His phone rang. Lily's voice chirped through. "Daddy, I'm better." He smiled, not for recognition, but because he knew he'd changed something bigger, a lesson in empathy, responsibility, and the power of refusing to stay silent. against injustice.